What's up, everybody? This is Charlie Potter, senior team writer with BamaOnLine.com, here with our 1000th video on YouTube. I looked that up the other day, Tim. This is video number 1000. Now, some of it is
Impressive.
interviews and stuff. We haven't done 1,000 shows, let's be real. But if you're watching on YouTube, then there's a ton of content on that page. And there's going to be more with basketball, spring football. It's never ending, it feels like. But we're back for another BOL Basketball Show. Tough week for Alabama. We knew it was going to be tough, though, going to Tennessee on the road and playing Florida at home. And we're going to start that game in Knoxville, Tim. Alabama lost 79-76. Blake and I were there in the building, and we were actually talking about it at the game last night in Coleman, how when it happened, we just didn't say anything. Like we had so much written and so much ready to go for them to win because of the way it kind of fell apart in the last 30 seconds that we had to delete and rework a lot of things. So a buzzer beater from Jemai Mashak, just a complete collapse in the last 30 seconds in Knoxville. Nate Oates took a lot of the blame for that, for not subbing in some guys, for not calling a timeout when LeBaron Philon was called for a 5-second violation. There was a lot that went wrong in the game. They weren't great from a layups perspective. I think they were 12 of 29 at the rim. They struggled at the free throw line with 9 misses. But really, you can circle that last 30 seconds of why they lost the game, because it felt like Alabama was in control for the rest of it.
Yeah, it's brutal. It's a brutal way to end a basketball game. You hate to see it. Neutral observers saw a really good basketball game. It wasn't ugly like you kind of expected. Tennessee's been in some ugly games before. It was pretty much a mix of what they wanted to do and what Alabama wanted to do. But to get to that final 30 seconds, I think that summed it up. I think the optimist can look, hey, you're up 4 points with 36 seconds. You end up with the ball, very high percentage chance of winning. That's how good this Alabama team can be. Tough win against a top 5 team. Would have been a tough win in a top five opponent in a very tough environment. Great crowd that Tennessee had. But then not to get a shot, just a killer, and then to give up a shot, an uncontested. It's not a high percentage shot, but anytime a grown man plants his feet, squares his shoulders, and shoots comfortably, it's a higher percentage shot than you want in that situation. Most of the times what you get is you get a miss, you get a pass, you get 2 dribbles, and you get a 60-foot shot from the chest, right? Almost with the knee kick, like the old Bob Cousy jumper. That didn't happen. That was a good look. Again, I don't think it's a high percentage shot, but I thought it was a really good look in that situation. I think Rick Barnes found it interesting. Rick Barnes was trying to call timeout.
Yeah.
If they had missed it, the Tennessee fans would have been livid. And since they made it, the Alabama fans are livid. So just to me, it was a great basketball game. Not good the finish for Alabama. But I still think this team fought really hard, played pretty well, and overall did a good job there. Just didn't close out the game. And for that, that's an F in the final 30 seconds. But other than that, I thought they played well, withstood a really good Tennessee crowd.
Yeah, we heard from Nate Oates pretty immediately after the game. It's probably the fastest he's come up from a post-game press conference, and I think he really wanted to take ownership for it. I think he did that in the locker room. He talked about how he told the guys they led for 39 and a half minutes, and then he failed them at the end. So it's tough because that's a win that Alabama could have picked up. Like it's very realistic. Like they were the better team for most of the game. And Blake, when you're watching it there at Thompson Bowling Arena, just what did you think of the overall performance? And then again, that last 30 seconds.
I think it's a frustrating outcome because they did play better than Tennessee for 39 and a half minutes, like Oates said. And I thought this was the best that they played a Tennessee team in probably like 3 years or something like that. Like they weren't overly affected by Tennessee's physicality, which a lot of people were worried about going into that game. They handled the physicality well. They handled Tennessee's defense well. They were able to get a lot of looks outside of like a small couple minute stretch in the second half that they really liked offensively. Like they kind of had their way offensively against the number 1 defense in the country, analytically on their home floor, like away from home, playing at the number 1 defense in the country. They scored the most points they've ever scored against Tennessee under Nate Oates. They finally broke that 75-point threshold. And then defensively, I thought Alabama played pretty well the entire game and kind of continued the trend from the 2 games before that of them playing better defensively, communicating better, all sorts of things like that. But then you had just back to back, like low percentage things happen all in a row that led to the collapse in the last 30 seconds. You gave up an and one on Chaz Lanier when you were up 4. And then Nate Oates pulls the big man early on the rebound so he can have free throw shooters and offensive players in there for the next offensive possession. And because he pulled the bigs out of the game, they give up a rebound, and then they foul him on the rebound, give him 2 free throws. And then you don't get a shot off. You have to go underneath the basket. You get a 5-second call. Oates had 2 timeouts in his pocket that he didn't use, that he took ownership of. And then on the last play, you don't put defenders in the backcourt, which lets them get off a way easier shot than they should ever. Like you shouldn't get to just kind of walk up the floor with 3 seconds left and get a shot from around the logo. Like that's way easier of a look than you should be able to get in that situation. So all of those things are fairly low percentage things of happening in a vacuum, and they all happened in succession to kind of lead to blowing this game. And it's even more unfortunate now with this loss to Florida that I'm sure we're about to get to, because that's a chance that you should have had. That's a win you should have had on your resume that now you don't. And now you're struggling to you're looking at probably not a 1 seed. You're looking at a 2 seed. It's just unfortunate the way that game transpired and what it means now.
Charlie, real quick, the SEC is so good that every time you miss an opportunity, it really adds to the next game. You saw that at Ole Miss where they reacted well. But when you blew the Tennessee game, that Florida game, had you won Tennessee, we're talking about a different, obviously intense, but a different intensity, because now you're not only facing Florida coming off a Tennessee loss, you got Auburn behind Florida. We knew how rugged this stretch was, but when you missed that opportunity, it's a huge missed opportunity. I think Tennessee's they're a 2 seed now. They were a 1 seed projection until losing to Ole Miss last night. It's just brutal.
It is, and that's kind of what I wanted to ask you guys. I mean, it is a regular season game. You try not to make too much of it, but it's a disappointing loss because it was there to be had. Just when you think about like a tough loss like that, what is the last one that maybe trumps this one? I know we have varying degrees of basketball watching history here, but when you think of past Alabama games, what's a tougher one than this, Tim?
I tend not to overreact to the basketball. I thought about this. I knew this question was coming. The basketball season, because so much happens. I can't think of just a to me, it wasn't like, it's not the same as football. Football, you get 12 games or whatever. Basketball, still a lot of basketball left. I don't have one off the top of my head. I thought about it. I can't think of UCLA a few years ago in the tournament hurt. Bama's on a run, kind of favored in that game. Losing to San Diego State as the 1 seed, probably would be up there. But a regular season game, I don't know. I don't even consider it. Wasn't like some crazy thing happened, like a kick 6 or some moment where they threw it, it hit off a scoreboard like a Jordan McDonald's commercial. I just think in this season it was brutal because of everything that was on the line.
I don't know. You can ask the people in Knoxville, and I just watched some reaction after the game, and they were talking about how's the best game they've watched in that arena. They've already named it the Meshack Miracle. They've got names for it. It's up there. So, Blake, what about you? Do you have something that it does? I will say, though, mentioning the NCAA tournament games, it kind of feels like that. I know it's a regular season game and the importance isn't there, but from just a kind of gut punch feeling that it feels kind of substantial.
Real quick, I'll say the one thing that kind of lessened it, at least for me, was they weren't going to win the SEC. So whether they're 2, 3, or 4 seed, that kind of, if it had been, setting up to play Auburn for a winner takes all in that last game, it probably would have been. But we already knew Alabama was out of the SEC, regular SEC championship game.
What about you?
Yeah, I think I'm just going to talk about the last couple of years and just compare it to like gut punch type losses under Nate Oates. It's up there, and there haven't been a ton of games that have felt this. Like there have been losses, there have been plenty of losses, but none that kind of felt this way outside of the San Diego State and UCLA Sweet 16 games. Both had that gut punch feeling, especially because you were a higher seeded team playing a lower seeded team. You had high expectations, Final Four hopes, and those were kind of gone with those 2 games. The UCLA one especially, because if you remember, Herb Jones missed a free throw, maybe missed 2 free throws at the end of the game, and then Alex Reese hits the buzzer beater to send it to overtime, and they end up losing in overtime. And you think back like, oh, if he made a free throw, that Alex Reese shot is played on March Madness loops forever. Like that would be kind of an immortalized shot. As far as regular season goes, I can't think of a worse one in terms of the way you lost a team that you haven't beaten in 3 years or so, like a team that you're trying to get over the hump against. You're in their building. It feels like you're finally about to, and then the way that they collapsed in the last 30 seconds. Another regular season game that kind of felt like that was I think the Auburn game at home in 2022 when Alabama wasn't as good, but Auburn had Jabari Smith. They had a comeback. Auburn fans kind of invaded Coleman Coliseum. Like I can remember that as sort of a gut punch like regular season game. But as far as like the way that they lost, the situation, the circumstances surrounding it, it's up there in terms of kind of painful losses in recent memory for Alabama basketball, at least.
See, this is why we ask the questions. We get different answers. I like them both, but that's why we ask the questions. Another tough loss, though, on Wednesday night to Florida. It was a busy day in Tuscaloosa. We had spring football practice that morning. We had Ryan Grubb for the first time over at the indoor facility. We also heard from a couple players. And then, you finish up work, you got like an hour and a half, and then you're back at Coleman Coliseum for a top 10 matchup. And from that one, though, this one was a lot different than the Tennessee game. I think Tim kind of alluded to it with the loss. There just wasn't a lot of pop. Nate Oates mentioned that a lot in this post-game press conference from the players. It seemed like Florida had more energy, maybe from the jump, but particularly in the second half. It's a 99-94 loss, which doesn't look as bad. It kind of felt like Florida controlled that game for most of it, though. The big stat here is the rebounding, and I think that's what we'll all kind of touch on because it was the most glaring deficiency. As Alabama gets rebounded by 15, and they knew they had to come into this and put a better effort up on the glass, and they just didn't. So disappointing loss at home, back-to-back losses. We'll get to what it means for the SEC and NCAA tournament in a bit, but just your immediate reaction from that loss to the Gators on Wednesday night, Tim.
I mean, I think Florida's an excellent team. I think they're one of the top 3 teams possible to win it all. I mean, I think you're looking at Auburn, maybe Duke, and Florida. Very talented team. Got a sharpshooter, got athletic bigs. I mean, you look at this team, I think, when your expectations are so high, preseason possible number 1, winning the SEC, when you take some of those goals away, I think there's a natural letdown, and there's just not a team to be let down against. I mean, this is not the team to be let down against. Again, 6 turnovers. I think this team is at its worst when it turns the ball over the least. It just feels like it's hard to explain, but I just feel like when they're near 18 or 20, they're at their best. Of course, I'm kidding, but the free throw shooting was bad. The confusion with the bigs just absolutely outplayed with those guys running the floor. And I agree. I just think Alabama, I think the season's been very long. They lost a big target, and that's not an excuse. These are emotions. I mean, everything's an excuse when you're mad at your favorite team. Have you noticed that? Oh, stop making excuses, spinning it. No, it's been a long, challenging year where how many games have mattered? I mean, they're well into 15 to 20 games that have been, to somewhat degree a big game. I thought Mark played particularly well despite the shooting. I mean, he had 30 points, no turnovers, 6 rebounds, 5 assists. No, he didn't shoot well from the 3, but he had a really good game on senior night. So good for him. I feel like Chris was a little bit slower. I think this team's a little banged up. I think this team mentally and physically, and not that we know other teams are tired and all that too, but the depth on this team isn't what it was expected to be. They're missing 3 key cogs, not walk-ons, not backup players, 3 key cogs with Reed out, especially when you're having trouble defending with Reed gone, you're really at a disadvantage. And then 2 of their best shooters, which is something, again, they've struggled with off and on with 3-point shooting, but not surprised they lost. Am surprised in the way they lost. I think Nate said that as well. Florida's a good team, but you give up 99 points, but you scored 94 points. So I think that, I mean, it's not shocking to me after the Tennessee game. They were a little deflated, but you expected to see more. It's a pretty good crowd. You expected to see more from them last night. So that's definitely disappointing.
It was a good crowd. It's the last home game of the season. It was senior night, which they did the ceremony after the game, which I don't love. But
I don't get that.
I mean, it's It's to avoid distractions. You probably will have a little bit better crowd at the end of the game than before, because I've said it before a million times. You're not going to have a great crowd 20 minutes, 30 minutes before tip. It's always after the lights come up, after the anthem. You're going to get your true crowd, and everybody's going to be in there. But, Mark had a great game in his last game in Coleman Coliseum. I think the fact that no turnovers, 38 minutes played, that shows the way that he's kind of matured over the course of the season. So I do think, though, we talked about the rebounds, but you look at Nate Oates pointed this out. These are Alabama stats. This isn't the official box score. It's a little different, but there's a combined 45 points given up in fast break and in second chance points. So that was really something that he hammered in his post-game press conference. And when you look at just those stats, the rebounds and those 45 points that Nate Oates mentioned, Blake, just how good was Florida and maybe how bad was Alabama just in terms of those key elements?
Yeah, I mean, Florida was great. Florida looked like a national championship level team, which we knew they were, but they came into another really tough road environment and showed it. They have road wins at Auburn and Alabama this year. Like, they have two of the better wins. Like, that's probably the best pair of wins any team has in college basketball this season. And that just shows you how good Florida is. So there's no shame in losing to Florida. There is some shame in how they lost to Florida. And it's just glaring. Like you said, the rebounding margin, like being minus 15, that's easily the worst they've been out-rebounded in a game this year. They've only been out-rebounded 4 times in a game ever this year, like throughout the entire season. And this is the only time they've been out-rebounded by double digits. Like, this is a good rebounding team. And for them to be out-rebounded by 15 and just kind of get punked like every time down the floor on the glass is very uncharacteristic. And it feels kind of like an outlier. And then the effort on the glass kind of bled into other areas where they weren't getting 50-50 balls. They weren't making as many hustle plays. They didn't have as much pop. They didn't have as much energy. And that's not like it. It's hard to swallow when you lose a game because you can watch and see that they don't have as much pop and energy as the other team. I think there are a lot of things you could point to as reasons for that. I think reasons are different than excuses. Like, I think they are tired, probably, and they should be, because they've played 6 straight ranked teams. They're about to play a 7th straight ranked team, and we talked about this stretch for weeks leading up to it, about how difficult it was going to be. But it's not just the fact that you're playing a bunch of ranked teams, that you're playing them back-to-back. You're not getting a ton of rest in between. Like this has to be physically taxing on this team, especially whenever you're talking about a team where 2 weeks ago or so, Oates was saying that they're tired and that he was taking days off of practice to make sure they were rested for games. So this is a team that already is thin. They're missing some of their rotation players, important players. And on top of that, they're playing the most difficult stretch of any schedule in the country in college basketball. And all of their losses have been to, top 10, top 12 teams. So it's not like they're dropping random games to Georgia and LSU and South Carolina. It's not like they're getting blown out either. They're in the majority of these games, but I think they're tired. They probably had a bit of a letdown off of the Tennessee loss, and that's not an excuse for how they played. That's just a possible reason for what kind of became what the result was last night.
When you look at it, Alabama's lost 4 of its last 6. And again, Blake alluded to it. We've talked about it ad nauseum. This was a brutal stretch to end the regular season. So I know Nate Oates was asked about it last night after the game. So I'm going to pose the question to you two guys. Just where is your panic meter right now going into the last game of the regular season? On a scale of 1 to 10, where do you sit, Tim?
I'm at a 2. I'm a little worried they're tired. I'm a little worried they're banged up. I think any goals they had ahead of them are still there. Big time goals. They wanted to win the SEC. Obviously, I love the SEC tournament, but I've never felt it was that important unless you've got to win it to get in.
Right.
Shout out to Colin Sexton. There's been moments like that. So I think with this Alabama team, you're playing for the better picture. Again, they haven't lost to scrub teams. 3 of those 4 losses are the top 5 teams. This is a stretch. I wonder how heavy the preseason, the early non-conference schedule would have been. knowing that the SEC ending was going to be so tough because the scheduling was so hard on the front end and so hard on the back end. I don't know anybody thought the SEC was going to be this good, right? I didn't. We saw so many teams pop up, but I'm not worried about this team. We've seen it's not some Final Four. They made the Final Four run last year. I just think this team has the talent. I mean, we're talking about a team that's lost to Tennessee and Florida by what, 8 points? I mean, they were tied with Auburn with like 6, 7 minutes left to go in that game. They were leading Tennessee with 36 seconds in that game. They scored 94 points on Florida, which is I think the second highest point total Florida gave up. So it's not like this team is void of talent. Now, whether they can mentally get there and mentally get right, which I think they can, that's a big part because when you've got three guards and when they're playing well with Chris, Aiden, and Mark, a lot of good things happen. But we've seen this team little by little have injuries. We've seen them hit walls. Mo D is a little bit different now than he was a few weeks ago. We know how good Mo D can be, though. Phylon, he hit a little wall. He's kind of came back out of it a little bit. So we're seeing it. This team was built for the NCAA tournament. Let's be clear. It wasn't built for the SEC or the SEC tournament. Those go with it. But this was built for the NCAA tournament. And that's still ahead of them. Obviously, there's issues to fix. But it's still the team we saw early in the year that was number one at one point. That was a projected number one seed. They ran into buzzsaws. And right now, they're the one getting bullied instead of being the bully. But those are some legitimate teams that are playing. Missouri played like the best team in the country that night. Part of that was Alabama's defense wasn't that good. But also, if you go back and watch, they were hitting contested shots. They were in fuego. They were unbelievable. So I still believe this team's got a lot left in them.
I do too, and it doesn't feel like last year. And Nato's kind of talked about that after the game as well. But I like what Blake was talking about with the rebounding because that's kind of the story of the Florida game. It's an outlier, and Florida's really damn good. We're all three in agreement in this. Like Florida's capable of winning the national championship this season. So to not play your best game against a team like that isn't something that you just tuck your tail between your legs and just lose the rest of your games. I don't think that the panic level meter is anywhere above 5 at this moment. I think them being maybe tired, you start to worry a little bit, but we'll get into that a little bit more. But what about you, Blake? Where does it sit for you?
I mean, it's low. Like I don't think there's a reason to be overly concerned, especially if you're looking through the lens of like, am I panicked that they can't make a run? Like, no. Am I panicked that they might not, win the national title? Like, sure, but you shouldn't have full confidence in anyone being able to win the national title. College basketball is like the hardest sport in the world to win a national title, and you've got to win 6 games in a row, all against really good competition. So as far as making a run, I mean, the first and second rounds of the NCAA tournament are going to be the easiest games, these easiest opponents these teams have played in a month. Like, you look at the level of competition that they played in the SEC really since the bye week, or really after the Texas game, like from the Auburn game on through the SEC tournament, the round of 64 and round of 32 games will be worse teams than every single one of those teams have played. So like, I'm not sitting here like, oh my gosh, they're gonna lose in the first round to a 15 seed, or they're gonna blow it to a 7 seed in the second round. Like, that doesn't worry me at all with this team. I think they've shown that they can take care of business against inferior competition. They've done that time and time again. So I have no issues or concerns or worries about this team making the Sweet 16. And then once you get to the second weekend, the way the NCAA tournament works, it's kind of a big, like, you don't know what's going to happen once you get to that second weekend. Like, you get there and then you hope for the best. You hope for good matchups. You hope for a good draw. You hope you're playing good basketball at the right time. Like, there's no telling. And comparing this to last year, my panic meter last year was probably at like an 8 at this point last season, because they lost 4 of 6 going into the tournament last year, and they were getting their doors blown off in every single game. They were giving up 100, and they looked like they were quitting. And Nato said that. And I think it's crazy that he said that, for one, because some of those guys are still on this team. But he said, like, last year, I thought some guys quit. Like, and I was in Gainesville last year, which I think was a year ago yesterday, when they went on the road and got absolutely destroyed by Florida right after losing a tough home game to Tennessee, which kind of would have been for the regular season title. And it really did look like guys were quitting on the floor. Like, they were not trying I don't think that's the case. I don't think that's what we've been seeing these last couple of weeks. They've been losing games, but they haven't been not trying. Like they have been playing. They've been in games. They've come back in games. They blew the Tennessee game. They tried to come back. Florida almost blew the game last night, but they haven't been not trying. They've been losing, but it's just been the level of competition that they played combined with some poor play. I still think they're in a good spot. They've got a great resume. They're not going to drop below a 2 seed because of how good the resume is. They're going to be in a good spot playing a 15 seed in the first round. And then from there, you kind of see what happens. But I still have full confidence that they can get to the second weekend and make some noise in the NCAA tournament here in a couple weeks.
I think history rewrites itself. I mean, me and Charlie Potter were debating the seriousness or the chances they had against North Carolina last year. I mean, there wasn't a lot of excitement. Now, history rewrites itself. Everybody I know knew they were going to the Final Four. Literally, I was telling friends last night that your panic and was times 10 last year at this time. They're like, no, it wasn't. Yes, it was. Yes, it was.
Everybody told me last year they were going to lose to Charleston in the first round of the tournament up in Spokane, and then they won by 30.
Well, we're saying it now. I mean, I'm seeing people say, at least we've got the Final Four. Well, hell yeah, we got the Final Four. Like, that's a big-ass deal. I mean, that's why you celebrated it. But I do think that the ebbs and flows of a basketball season, most teams aren't like Auburn, who's been really consistent. The majority of these teams have been up and down, look like the best. We've seen them go back and forth. Duke hasn't played the schedule that some of the other teams are, but they're obviously really good, got a unique talented freshman. But yeah, I mean, they're down right now. It's easy to go, it's over. Or, you can say, hey, at least see what's going to happen, see if this team turns it around. Because we know if they play bad, they could lose. That's not a hot take. That is
that's everybody.
That's the coldest take in the world. And then if they play great, they can win. No shit. Like, no kidding. That's how simple sports are. So that's it. But this team, we've seen them look fantastic. I mean, it wasn't long ago. Would they rip off 8 or 9 wins in a row going into this?
I think it was 7 going into the
7 wins in a row going into this, coming off that Ole Miss loss. They hit a buzzsaw, and right now they're the wood instead of the guy holding the saw, and they've got to flip that script.
The good news is that even though Alabama lost to Florida on Wednesday night, Missouri also lost to Oklahoma. So that clinched the double bye in the SEC tournament. So Alabama's not going to have to play until Friday. And we've kind of talked about how this team is maybe a little tired. They've got some old guys that Nados is trying to keep the tread off their tires. You got to go to Auburn on Saturday, but then there's a gap, and that might be the biggest blessing for this team, because I'm with Tim too. Like, you don't have to go and win the SEC tournament. Alabama, unless they just lose. I don't even know if that's the case. I don't think Alabama's going to fall off the 2 line in the NCAA tournament.
I don't think there's any.
But like, you get some time off, and then you can win a game in Nashville and pick things up going into the NCAA tournament. Like, it's setting up nicely for Alabama just in terms of getting a little bit of a break. So when you look at that double bye for Nashville, Tim, just how big is that? And again, I know how we feel about the SEC tournament, but how big is it to get that double bye and maybe to pick up a win or 2 in Nashville?
Now, I love the SEC tournament, but usually when I was growing up, you had to win it to get in the NCAA tournament. So it was a lot more intense at the time. I think the double bye was huge. In fact, everything went Alabama's way last night except their game.
Yeah.
Tennessee got upset at Ole Miss, which kept the possibility alive that Alabama could be the 3 seed instead of the 4 seed. But Tennessee had to lose. Otherwise, Tennessee had to lose to South Carolina, which is probably not happening. And Bama had to win at Auburn. So you got a double whammy there to go. So even then, to have a prayer now, it's one or the other. Again, you get the double bye. Missouri upset at Oklahoma, and that's how crazy. I was looking at the bracket. If Bama's the 4 right now, it looks like they'd play the winner of Missouri or Georgia and Texas, and there's no guarantee that's Missouri. Texas has shown ability. They got an elite, very elite guard in Trey Johnson, and then Georgia's a pest. They're a little bit they're a little bit Dennis the Menace. They could irritate you. They've been playing good basketball at the time, but that's how tough that tournament is. But huge to get that extra rest, huge to get to that point of just mentally readjusting. I think that right now, time off is is of the essence. I still think they need to practice, but I think they just need
Oh
to
yeah.
hone in what they're going to do. And again, this is an extra day for Reed, who I'm still hoping to hear an update on, that he can play in this NCAA tournament. Because even as a defender, rust my butt. You know what I mean? You're not really rusty defensively. You're usually rusty offensively. So right now, I mean, having a big guy like that can rebound, if he can move well enough, would be big if you get a chance to get him back.
What about you, Blake? I know you'll probably be there for the whole thing, so you have to wait a while for Alabama to play. But just the clinching of the double bye, how big is that going into this last game of the regular season?
It's big because you get an extra day of rest. It's one less game that you potentially have to play. And, it gives you the chance to kind of get some positive things going because, depending on who you play in that first round, like that's a chance to get a win. And then if they end up the 4 seed or the 3 seed, like you're going to get a chance to play maybe a team that you lost to in the semifinals, whether that be an Auburn or a Florida or a Tennessee. And I don't think anybody doubts this team's ability to beat one of those teams on a neutral floor. Like, yes, you lost to them all, but you're right there in the game with all of them. And if things bounced a different way, if they played a little better, they very well could have won any of those games. And so I'm sure this team would like a chance to get back at one of those guys. But also, it's just a chance to start playing better basketball again. And that's, I think, the most important thing. It doesn't matter for seeding. Like I don't, like you said earlier, I think they're locked into a 2 seed. I don't think there's much that they can do to lose that. I think if they lost every single one of their games remaining, they'd still be a 2 seed. Cause you look at the metrics in resume metrics, they're pretty much number 2 or number 3 across the board. And then you look at others like the Net and KenPom, they're no lower than number 6 in any of those. So you're not going to combine and average and scrub that against other teams and ever end up as a 3 seed the way that things are looking. So there's not much that you can, I don't think they're going to jump to a 1 seed necessarily either, but you're always playing to win games, win a conference tournament championship. So I think they'll be playing to start playing better basketball, and it's a good chance to do that and to get a lot of rest and to get that extra day. That's going to be big for this team to get, 5 days between playing Saturday and then playing the quarterfinal round on Friday. I think that'll be really big for them.
I mean, for the ultimate optimist, a 1 seed's still on the table, right? It's just
Yeah.
go to
It
Auburn.
could be, yeah.
I mean, if you beat Auburn in Auburn, and again, hypothetical, we know the odds against us. You don't have to tell us, but you win a game in Auburn and you go to the SEC championship game, I think you're a 1 seed.
Yeah,
I don't think there's anything more difficult than that, because to win that 3-2, 4-1 matchup, you're going to have to beat another top 5 team. So you're going to have to straighten that out. So even that, I mean, I know it's down. It doesn't look good at this moment in time, but that's still on the table for this team. But I'll be honest, I don't think there's a huge difference between 1 and a 2 seed. And I actually think the 1 seed might be at a disadvantage this year because I feel like Kansas and UConn are lurking around as possible 8, 9 seeds. I feel like there's some
of those 8 and 9 seeds are scary.
Dude, I mean, would you want to play Kansas as an 8 and 9? I mean, would you want to play, some of the, I haven't looked at the overall.
Gonzaga's projected as an 8. Like, there's some tough teams on that line, right?
That's
now.
What I'm saying. There's always
8,
9's always, but this year more than ever, you've seen some really good teams with double-digit losses. So still a lot to play for.
Yeah, and right now, it's just one guy, but Joe Lunardi put out his bracket this morning, and he has Alabama as the number 6 overall seed. So there's room to grow or to climb. So it's not out of the realm of possibility. And I know we talked about the SEC tournament, a little bit about the NCAA tournament, but Alabama still has to go to Auburn on Saturday, and that's what we're going to wrap up with. It's round 2 of the Iron Bowl of basketball, and last time out, Alabama lost by 9 in Tuscaloosa. We've seen since then Auburn has won the regular season championship. They clinched it outright with the loss to Tennessee. They were all watching it on their phones, and I'm sure that's been replayed a bunch in the locker room. And if it hasn't already, it's going to be before this game on Saturday. But Auburn's coming off a loss. They lost to Texas A&M. So both of these teams are looking to bounce back in the regular season. So Auburn, I know, is a tough place to play. Alabama has seen good and bad outcomes there, but what do you think of this matchup to end the regular season with both of these teams coming off losses, Tim?
I mean, it's the same as I felt going into the first game. I mean, Auburn, the thing about Auburn is they kind of lean on you. And they don't like they're not super flashy. They just lean on you and they lean on you, and eventually you tumble over. They're very good defensively. They're very long. They're very experienced. We know how old of a roster they've got. They play within their self. They don't do a lot of crazy things. I enjoy watching them. I know I'm probably being in a lot of trouble for saying that, but I think it is one of the better teams in basketball. I think it's a pretty smooth type of basketball. Bruce Pearl's obviously a good coach. But with that said, Alabama had its moments. Even in the game with Auburn the first time, they had the moments. I mean, pushing back, they never really got over that hump. Did not. I mean, that was that their C game against Auburn? Part of that was Auburn pushed them into that C game. So we're giving Auburn full credit, but it wasn't their best performance. Now you kind of want to, I mean, I had buddies thinking hopefully Auburn's overlooking this game. Auburn ain't overlooking this game. It's impossible. Every Auburn fan there wants to win this game. But I do think there's a looseness of like, F it. Just play. There's nothing to lose. There's only something to gain. Overall, I don't think anybody cares about the SEC tournament seeding, but I mean, you just go in and play your game and shoot the ball. And if somebody needs to rest up a little bit, it might be a case where they need to rest up a little bit. But again, I'm looking forward to this. I still think Auburn's the number one team in the country. Alabama's a top 10 team right now. I still think top 5 overall when they're healthy and doing the right thing. So I'm looking forward to it. Obviously, Auburn's going to be the favorite. But still, I'm excited to see this one.
Yeah, I mean, I get where some people can come from and be like, maybe Auburn is overlooking this game because they've already wrapped up the regular season championship. But there's part of it with them celebrating the fact that they won it, but there's also celebrating the fact that Alabama lost. This game still means something to these guys. And it's going to be senior day. They have 47 seniors on that roster, as everybody knows. So they're going to be playing their last game.
That's their age. That's their age, by the way, not the number of seniors.
Not even added up. That's just how old they are.
There's nobody younger than Blake on the roster. Just a thought.
Probably not. But when you look at that game, I know we'll be there on Saturday, Blake. We finally got the confirmation that we got approved. But what do you make of this matchup, and how do you think it's going to shake out?
I really have no idea how this game is going to go, because like there is a possible letdown factor for Auburn because they have wrapped up the title, but they also kind of got their letdown out the other night when they lost to Texas A&M, and that probably kind of helped refocus them a little bit, losing that game. But then, I mean, neither side has anything to play for in this game except pride, which honestly makes it really exciting, like really fun. Like there's no title on the line. There's hardly any seeding on the line. Like, sure, you can gain a little bit, but like Alabama should just go into this game knowing that, like, play loose and just go see what happens. Like, go play your game and see what happens. It's a tough place to play. Alabama has still played well on the road lately, really outside of that Missouri game. Like, that's kind of the only bad game they've played on the road throughout all of conference play. Like, they lost the Tennessee game, but like we said a little while ago, like they played well in that game and should have won it. So I think that makes it interesting. I think Auburn's got some guys banged up. Denver Jones is banged up, and he was the best defender on the floor when these two teams played the first time. And I wouldn't be like, I don't know any of this. Like, this isn't, like, I don't know, but Bruce Pearl could decide to continue to rest him to get him ready for March and not want to play him in a regular season game that isn't for seeding. It isn't for anything as far as the postseason goes. If that is the case, that makes it even more interesting to me, because then I wonder who Auburn has for Mark Sears, because Jones did such a good job on him in the first meeting. So that would be an interesting wrinkle if Jones doesn't go. But really, Alabama has every bit of motivation to go out and play with more energy after what we just saw last night. So, they should be able to do that. And as if you're an Alabama fan, you shouldn't expect a win in this game. Like, Alabama's probably going to be probably a 7 or 8 point underdog if what the analytics have is anything close to what the books are going to have. But if they go out and play loose, play them tough, they're in it until the end, like that's a satisfactory performance against the number one team in the country on their home floor. I know everybody wants to win, but like, this is a really tough situation. You just want to see them go out and play with nothing to lose and see what happens from there.
Blake's got a good point, because this Auburn team's built for a national championship too. I think Alabama, Auburn both went down that path. Winning the SEC's kind of the road to, being a 1 seed. But I think Auburn does have bigger plans ahead. They're a locked number 1 overall seed. it doesn't. Florida's going to be in the same. There's some SEC teams that are locked in wherever they're going to be basically at this stage. And then there's still some battling. Alabama and Auburn are what they are going into this game.
It should be a fun one. Like I said, Blake and I will be in Auburn on Saturday. It should be a lot of fun, and it's going to be the last game of the regular season. So next week we'll be previewing the NCAA, or not the NCAA tournament. I'm looking ahead, the SEC tournament in Nashville. So if you haven't already, be sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube page. If you're listening via podcast, give us a 5-star rating and a review. We greatly appreciate that. And until then, we'll see you guys on the next show.